Hi, welcome. I'm Fawzya Khosti, and today we are interviewing Edi Connor. And she is a licensed therapist, marriage and family therapist. And I'm really excited to interview her for the 2022 Executive Function Summit. So, Edie is a licensed marriage and family therapist with more than 12 years of experience working with individuals and couples struggling with depression, anxiety, life transitions, and other stressors. She previously worked as a special education teacher for 30 years, which I absolutely love because you understand how executive function works in day-to-day life. Edie has earned her master's degree in counseling and student personnel from Minnesota State University, Mankato, and her marriage and family certification from St. Mary's University, Twin Cities campus. She holds a master's degree in special education from the University of St. Thomas, St. Paul, which is also in Minnesota, and a bachelor's degree in education from the University of Oklahoma, which is located in Norman, Oklahoma. She is an approved supervisor for the Minnesota Board of Marriage and Family Therapy, which is awesome because she gets to participate in helping others become a well-rounded therapist. And her clients describe her as engaging, accepting, understanding, direct, and a great cheerleader with a great sense of humor. And Edie uses a relational strength-based approach to her therapy sessions with her clients. Depending on her clients' needs, she chooses from several modalities of treatment. These include cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, with training in dialectical behavioral therapy and sensory motor psychotherapy and EMDR. So you might have heard some of these, you might have not heard of any of them, and that is something that we may talk about later in our conversation today. But what I would like to start off with was, Edie, would you mind just sharing a little bit more about who you are and why you do what you do?
Yes, thank you, Fawzya. I think all of this goes back to when I began school, kindergartner, moved into first grade, and I struggled. I couldn't read. I was always anxious all the time, only I didn't know what those things were back then.
Right.
Um, and as I progressed through school and finally did learn to read, I still struggled with paying attention. If there was too much information coming at me, I just sort of floated away, just gone. Um, and I did graduate as I went to school at the University of Oklahoma. I actually discovered what ADHD was, what dyslexia was, and I thought, I know my path in life. And as I got licensed to be a special education teacher, I I found myself. I had very big relational um, situations with kids. Worked in a private learning disability school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I remember reading the book um, P.S. You're Not Listening. And it was all about a young man who was struggling through school and trying to get somebody to understand.
Mm-hmm.
All those kids in my class just had their heads on the table listening, and it was
Wow.
our after lunchtime. We would sit there and they just loved it. And I found myself knowing, oh, sorry, knowing more and more, this is exactly what I needed to do. I progressed on. We moved from Tulsa up to Minneapolis, um, worked various special education positions, and I decided I needed more. I
Mm-hmm.
was really, really good, excellent at what I did, but I missed the relational part, um, which included sometimes the parents. Why is my child acting this way? Well, because your child's struggling in school, and here are
Right.
some reasons why. So, it just progressed. And here I am as a marriage and family therapist, loving what I do.
I really appreciate you sharing that story because I get a lot of clients who come in and they are also struggling. And one of the things that I tell them is that these struggles that you have in life right now, you can use those to make them to create strengths that will make you good at what you do later in life. And it sounds like you did something similar to that. And I love that. It's a very inspirational way of talking about your path. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
And so today we're going to talk about generalized anxiety and specifically ADHD. Um, can you give us a nice description of what generalized anxiety disorder is and ADHD so that as we progress through this conversation, we're very clear on the definition?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So, generalized anxiety disorder is characterized by a persistent and excessive worry about any number of things. It could be about school, it could be about work, it's relationships, it's about money. Um, and what ends up happening is they find it really, really difficult to control the anxiety. You know, excuse me. It's persistent, it's uncontrollable, there's excessive worry, feeling on edge, irritability. Many things that we see in children or adults that we look at as perhaps it's anger, perhaps it's something else, but it's their anxiety. For some, it's about insomnia, not being able to sleep, or I can go to sleep, but I can't stay asleep. And so there are those pieces. ADHD, I look at um, is highly inherited. It can be.
Can be, yes.
Not always, but it can be. Um, it affects about, I believe, 7 to 8% of the population. It could be higher now. It's a chronic condition that includes attention difficulties, hyperactivity, impulsivity, um, and it, it ends up for some not being able to or having difficulty paying attention to the details.
Mm-hmm.
What's important here, what isn't. Often very difficult task of being organized or organizing situations. Um, in my household, it has a lot to do with losing things. Where's my keys? Where's the um, and so there are those pieces of it. Um, yeah, so there's inattentiveness, there is hyperactivity, there's impulsivity.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So now that we have a pretty clear understanding of what the definition of generalized anxiety is, as well as ADHD, um, what what are the overlapping symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder and ADHD? Like from your perspective, what do you normally see when a client comes into your office?
Good question. Um, Often I will see that they have difficulty carrying out tasks. Um, they the task might be very simple, but they can't do it. They have difficulty with social interactions, difficulty concentrating, paying attention, staying focused. Um, those are the biggest. There's also in both at varying times the inability to relax. There's that restlessness that's
Mhm.
going on, that being on edge at times. And
Mhm.
so those are the big overlaps that I've been seeing.
So what's the major difference between ADHD and generalized anxiety disorder?
Um, good question. Sometimes it's really hard to pick it out. Um, but with anxiety, they're unable to concentrate in situations that um, cause a person difficulty concentrating in a situation that those without anxiety just look at it like, well, that's life and I'm going to move on. Whereas with ADHD, the difficulty depends on the situation. It can come and go. So there's a difference to the intensity of it, the worry about it.
Gotcha. Okay. So when somebody comes into your office and they have ADHD, do they often always, or do they often also have anxiety disorder
Well, I
or
would
or just generalized anxiety?
I would say I tend to see a lot more of that than I used to.
Okay.
Maybe uh, maybe I'm more aware of it now than I used to be, but I am seeing a lot more of the comorbidity, the coexisting condition,
Right.
um, and and I find that interesting in that um, you know sometimes I go, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, it's hard to tell sometimes, isn't it?
It is, except that with ADHD, it, like you're born with it. Like it's a neurological situation. And with generalized anxiety, it doesn't often get diagnosed until later. Not that children aren't diagnosed with it, because they are more now than they used to be. Um, and both can be inherited.
Do you think it's possible that we're getting better at diagnosing, better at identifying these challenges in kids? Or do you think that our recent world events have kind of elevated these problems? Or
I
maybe
think
both?
I think both. I think we are much better at diagnosing both. I think that anxiety in the past has often been overlooked because of the symptoms. They're immediately looked at as, oh, this is ADHD because she can't sit still, she's fidgeting. Oh, in the meeting, he just spaces out. And so it isn't, or it wasn't always um, diagnosed early on, where ADHD um, most regularly.
And I
Um,
think more people, especially in the education arena, they
yes,
lean more towards the ADHD because that's what they're educated on versus the generalized anxiety. Would you agree
and
with that?
I most definitely agree with that. I know that back when I was a special education teacher in the Minnetonka schools, I always ended up with the kids that had emotional issues, and it was almost always anxiety
Mm-hmm.
diagnosed with or without, but often with ADHD. And I think that is happening a lot more now. But I also look at the world we live in right now, there's a lot of anxiety. And
Oh, absolutely.
people see it more now because it's right there in front of us. So both.
And I think the general population might also be more educated. I think people are starting to just with the once the internet was up running, there's just such a vast amount of information on there. I think everyone looks at information, so maybe they misdiagnose themselves, but they're also finding out more information, so maybe they have enough to go say, I need to see a doctor, or I need to see a psychologist, or I need to see a therapist. So they have enough information to identify, maybe I have ADHD, or maybe I have generalized anxiety, but I don't know. So I'm going to go see someone to kind of, go through these, tidbits of information and find out.
Well, I agree with that. I also look at it, um, back in the Stone Age when I was growing up, in the 50s and 60s, you did not talk about ADHD. You didn't talk about mental health issues at all. It was sort of, at least where I was swept under the carpet, so to speak. And now it's out there, whether it's the internet or it's through friends or on TV, you see, well, just take blah, blah, blah for your anxiety or your
Right.
ADHD. So people are so much more aware
I
and
think you're
open.
right. And more open. I think there's less of a stigma now. So people can talk about their ADHD openly, and it doesn't mean they're not going to get the job, or they can talk about their anxiety, and it doesn't mean they're going to be ousted from that social circle. It's a little bit more accepted. And I find it fascinating because people now tell me their, not even in a work setting, they'll tell me their mental health challenges, like, oh, I have ADHD or I have anxiety, without even thinking that I might have a negative reaction to it. But so I think it's just more open as a society.
I would agree. I know that when when I was going through St. Mary's to finish my certification, I often had to say, could you run that by me again? Because I just spaced out there. You know, and for me, I do that, and I know that I do that when when I start getting anxious about how much is coming at me, and then my inattentiveness just sort of floats away, and oh, look, isn't that a pretty cardinal outside? Or
Well, it was like that movie Up, where they had the dog that's talking, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, squirrel. I still I think that is one of the best descriptions of ADHD I've ever seen. Like, every
yes,
dog has ADHD. I'm like, oh my God, that is hilarious.
I I
But
I totally agree. You know, and I have kids come into the office and talk about, well, you know, I was listening to the teacher and then all of a sudden I don't know where my brain went, but
went on vacation and I never
yeah,
came back in time, so I missed all this information. And
I just took a break, like, took a mental break, but you know, it happens. Um, and I don't know what else to say about it. It's just people
right.
know more, they say more. Um,
From an educational perspective, at least for me, I see ADHD as just having a lot of gaps in learning.
yes.
And so I have to address that as an executive function coach. As a therapist, how do you treat ADHD? How do you treat anxiety, generalized anxiety? Because you've got all these different modalities that you use. What do you recommend? What do you do?
Well, that's an interesting question. I use a lot of the CBT, not CBD, CBT, because it really takes a look at the faulty thinking that people have at times about themselves.
Can you
That
explain
is,
what that means?
yes, it means thinking negatively or having negative thoughts about what I can or can't do. Now, some of that has been taught to them. Oh, you can't do that.
Right.
That's going to be too hard. And some of it is, I haven't been able to do this before. I don't think I can do it. Oh, this is really long. I'm going to lose concentration. I don't know how to do that kind of stuff. So the negative thinking that goes on.
Do you think that that parenting has an influence on that?
I think parenting does have an influence on that. Um, I think I think parents are getting better at helping their children with it, with encouraging. Um, I do believe that schools often, sad to say, create some of it.
I agree with that.
Why can't you do this? It's a simple task. Well, I'm not interested in it, and so I didn't pay attention to it, and I lost focus. But they
Right.
hear the negative all
I
the
also
time.
think with the asynchronous development, not everyone's going to move as quickly and not everyone's going to move at the same intellectual speed. And so we don't allow for that in the classroom.
No,
It's like, here's your assignment. You have 15 minutes, take care of it. And if a student takes 20 minutes, it's too long. So
right.
now it just impacted their self-esteem, their confidence, and now they have negative thoughts.
Truly. And so then it is my job to work with them and talk to them about that was crummy because we both know you're able to do it. You need
Mm-hmm.
more time. You know, you're quite capable of this. And to flip it around to some opposite thinking, to some opposite messages. I can do this. It might take me a little longer. I might need to have my parents, have my special education teacher, myself advocate for me to have some
Mm-hmm.
extra time. So, coaching them on how to ask for what they need versus feeling bad about who they are because they need more time, or the way it was presented didn't fit their learning style because, you know, teachers often, and I get it, I was a teacher, so I understand, teach one direction. And
Right.
and
Yeah, and for
on
those who don't understand what learning styles are, we're talking about visual, we're talking about auditory, and we're talking about kinesthetic. So auditory is hearing it, visual is seeing it, kinesthetic is doing it. So as a teacher, you want to address as many of those learning styles as possible.
mhm,
Yeah, so I can
absolutely.
definitely see that. So it sounds to me like you have a really great way of helping people deal with their ADHD and their anxiety disorder. Do you have some stories, some wonderful stories that maybe you could share with our listeners to maybe help them identify better with what's happening, and so maybe encourage them to get the support that they need?
Absolutely. So, um, I think back to one of my children, who I will not name, um,
I do that all the time. We won't name names.
privacy.
Here's the story.
And I know that that child um, struggled with organization,
Mhm.
like absolutely struggled with organization. And I bought the binder, and here's math, here's science, here's history, language arts, your favorite. Oh, no, not your favorite. Arts your favorite. Okay, I get it. Now, if you get your homework, just put it right here in this slot and in this. And that child would come home day after day, week after week, month after month, and it was like a rat's nest. In
Oh,
in
I know what you're talking about, because I would have kids come into my office and I would have them bring in their backpack the first meeting that we would have, and we would
yes,
unload it onto my desk, and it was amazing what they had on there. It was
And
amazing, the stuff that they would accumulate. Garbage. I'm talking like candy wrappers.
oh, absolutely. And I remember going into, for this child, an IEP meeting. And the teacher went off. Now, child had ADHD, had math disabilities, among other things. And the teacher went off on how disorganized my child was and didn't finish homework and I was like, well, what's my child's disability? I don't know. Well, I think maybe you should. You're the teacher. You need to know this so you can help. Um, and so my child sat back, like looking at this teacher thinking, you don't even know anything about me.
Mhm.
Like, I am disorganized, but I keep everything in my backpack because it's my nest. And then I know where everything is.
Right.
Not necessarily in place,
Yeah,
but
not that I can find it right away, but it's there.
it's right. It's
They're
like,
making an attempt. The attempt is to try to organize. They just don't know how.
absolutely. I've also worked with kids where I've talked to them, like ask for what you need. The teacher does not know.
Right.
Teacher doesn't know you need more time. Teacher doesn't know that you didn't understand it because you kind of spaced out during that time. Um,
Well, you know what's interesting? I did, as an educator, when my kids were little, I did not ever help with homework. And everyone thought I was crazy. They're like, what do you mean you don't help your kids with homework? I said, I will not. I said, that is between them and their teacher. I said, if they come home and they make an effort to do their homework and they need help with it, then either the teacher missed the boat and didn't teach it correctly, or my child missed the boat and didn't pay attention in class. Either way, that's between the two of them.
right.
I need to stay out of that relationship. And I see a lot of parents that will come home and help their kids with the homework, but then who's learning the information? It's the parent.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it because
Right.
they want their child to get a good grade. But I think what's really important for people to understand is school is not just about the grades, it's actually about the learning. And if your child's not learning, then they're going to have more anxiety. And if they have a challenge like
Correct.
ADHD, the teacher needs to be aware of it and know how to address those issues in the classroom.
And that part is true. I I look at these little young ones in school this year after having been on the internet for a year.
Yeah. Well, I
And
think COVID really threw people for a loop.
oh my goodness gracious, yes. And those kindergarten, first graders who weren't even in a building, going into a school, not necessarily being aware that they have ADHD and the teachers being irate because sit still, pay attention. Why
Yeah.
are you? And I find that really difficult. That I know it's been a hard year for everyone,
Yeah.
teachers and kids, but the transition from online to in person, man, last year I could get up and move around and, you know,
Right.
5, 6 year olds were like, well, when they were teaching, I could stand up and do my ABCs, and now I have to sit still and I'm wiggly and I don't want to sit still. And
Well, honestly, I don't know how anyone can do kindergarten or first grade or maybe even second grade online. It just seems impossible to me because everything's so hands-on.
yes,
And kids do wiggle. And by the time, I mean, when they come in as a kindergartner, the teacher really gets to know their personalities and they get,
Right.
if they need services at that point, that's usually when they get the referrals. And
Right.
so by the time they get into first or second grade, the teacher doesn't really know them. The school doesn't really
Right.
know them. They just know the grades and that's it. So I feel for these kiddos because they come in to an environment where nobody really knows who they are.
And that nobody knows who they are. If they have ADHD, whatever combination of it, and that all they're being told is sit down now, this is time for this, we're not doing that. um, that can create that piece we talked about earlier, that anxiousness of
Mhm.
nobody's listening, I can't do this, I need to move, whatever it is. And so um, I think kids create their own little, oops, oh, my stuff fell on the floor, I have to get up and pick it up now. And you know I
Yeah, they do the best they can to adjust to an environment where they don't have much control.
right, because really they need to be moving.
Yes, I agree.
One of the important pieces of working with ADHD and or anxiety is movement,
Right.
exercise. Sitting still
Yeah.
is
I think our
doesn't work.
schools really do not meet kids' needs. And I don't mean just kids with ADHD or anxiety. They just don't meet kids' needs. Kids need to get up and walk around. I hear a lot of people talk about, well, my kid's in school because they need to socialize. I'm sorry, that's not where they go to socialize. They might be in education in a room with other kids, but they're not allowed to socialize. They're told to be quiet,
Right.
listen to the teacher. It's a place for mass education. It is not a socialization environment. And so I'm always puzzled when people tell me, well, I would homeschool my kid, but they need to be socializing at school. There's very little socialization that goes on at school. So I'm a big advocate of homeschool. I really am. And I think that meets a lot of kids' needs, especially when they have challenges like anxiety or ADHD, because then they can get up and move around. They can be with siblings who are from different age groups and they can learn in that asynchronous environment. And so I'm a big fan of something like that, especially for kiddos who have ADHD or anxiety.
I totally agree. When I first started at Minnetonka High School, where I was a special ed teacher, there was a program, Ombudsman, and it was computer based.
Mhm.
And I remember working with this young lady, ADHD, um, high anxiety. And we tried all kinds of things. I'll do independent study with you. Let's do this, let's do that. Just being in the building just was too much. And I referred her to Ombudsman. And I can only tell you, she came back a few months later for the play or whatever was going on. And she came up to my office and was like, oh, Miss Edie, thank you so much. This is the best school I've ever been at. I
Nice.
can ask the teacher something, I can get up and move without being in trouble, and it's just me and my computer unless I need help. And I thought, wow, it,
Yeah, and if they can do that, why not? It does take a
absolutely.
specific skill set to be that disciplined, but
Mm-hmm.
if they can learn that skill set, why not? I'm a big advocate of individualized education. I think we're all too different to be sitting in one classroom learning the exact same thing at the same time and
Right.
expecting everyone to move through the same speed. I just don't think it's effective, but yet that's the design that we have in place for our public schools. And even the charter schools and public and private schools have emulated that to the point where they're almost identical.
Yes.
But I don't think it's the most effective way of teaching kids anything. And yet it seems to be functional because we do have kids that excel, but I still think we could do better. I think this is an environment that could use a lot of improvement. So, I really appreciate all this wonderful knowledge that you're sharing with our listeners. If you were to give advice to somebody as a parent, what advice would you give somebody about their kiddos who have ADHD or generalized anxiety disorder? What information do you think they would need to help them transition through life in the best way possible?
I believe it's really important for parents to advocate for their kids, but also teach their kids how to advocate for themselves, to
Mhm.
not be afraid to say, this isn't working. I need I need something different. To not be afraid to um, schools will probably hate me for this, but um, it, if you believe that your child needs something extra in school, to not be afraid to say, I want my child tested. Don't be afraid to do that. That's an important piece. Um, Ask questions.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that as a parent, you are their strongest advocate. And until they learn to advocate for themselves as strongly, you have to be that voice. And so
Yes.
I completely agree with you. And I think there needs to be more communication between schools and parents so that we can better meet the needs of our children in the society, especially right now with all the issues that kids have had with COVID and all the, even parents struggled with that as well. Schools struggled with that. Nobody's ever done anything like that before. So I think we're going to have a lot of fallout from what happened. And I think we need to come up with a really solid plan to help move these kids forward so that they don't fall further behind, because they are behind, and maybe even have a plan to catch them up.
Well, and I agree. I'm working with a woman now who has 4 or 5 children. One of her kids is um, a junior, and she just found out that kids should have taken the ACTs by now, but her son has not. Kids should be looking into colleges. Where do you want to go? And she's like, what do? I didn't learn this. The kids didn't get this because they weren't in school last year.
Mhm.
So I pulled out my school counselor hat and said, well, it's never too late. You know, do the prep class if that's what you want to do. Have him retake his ACTs. Start looking. What is he interested in? Parents don't know.
Yeah.
They need to ask. They need to ask. It's
And I think
hugely.
that's important. If as a parent, this is not your area of expertise, then you have to advocate for your child and find, if you're not getting the answers you feel you need to be getting, go find someone else and ask them, hey, where can I get what I need?
Right.
And that you can always contact Edie or you can contact myself. So I really appreciate you spending so much wonderful time with us and sharing all this valuable information today. If somebody wanted to contact you directly, how could they do that?
Um, they could contact me via my email, um, which I'm not sure, Fawzia. Do you have my email there?
I have it written down, but if you'd like to give it through the chat, right, or not in the chat, but just go ahead and say it.
It would be my name, lowercase, Edie Connor, EDICONNOR, at Comcast.net, or by contacting me by phone, 952-484-8485.
I thank you once again for coming on the summit, talking about what you do and how you help individuals with generalized anxiety disorder as well as ADHD. I really appreciate it. I hope that our listeners benefit from your information. And if anybody needs to contact Edie, you know now how to do that. So thank you once again. And I hope this video is of value. Thank you.
Thank you.